Councillor Poulter, are you ready to start us off?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to this afternoon's Staffordshire Moorlands Affordable Warmth webinar. The Council published its strategy for tackling climate change at the end of 2021, which set an ambitious target for the District Council and the district as a whole to be carbon neutral by 2030. Carbon neutral basically means that the amount of carbon that is released is the same that is taken out. So you get a balance with no further increases in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. We know that this is obviously an ambitious target for both the council and the district, but we know the importance of taking urgent action and playing our part in trying to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial level. We will focus strongly on reducing the council's own carbon emissions, but we also need everyone to help if we're to reach net zero across the entire district. This needs to be a collective effort. The district and the county council are responsible for around 5% of our local emissions in the Staffordshire Moorlands and can influence around a third of those emissions. So we need everyone to be on board if we're going to achieve our district target of becoming net zero. And as part of our strategy, we've identified 7 different ways of getting to net zero. And the way we live is the first of these ways. We've identified working in partnership and supporting action to reduce fuel poverty as key actions in our plan. Now, official figures show that 16.2% of households in the Staffordshire Moorlands were living in fuel poverty in 2019, compared to an average of 13.8% for the whole of England. This is totally unacceptable, and we've committed ourselves to supporting activity to reduce this figure and to help those suffering from fuel poverty in our district. And just to say, fuel poverty refers to people who cannot keep their home adequately heated. We know that living in a cold and damp home is a contributory factor to many health issues, such as respiratory diseases, heart diseases, circulatory diseases, and a number of mental health problems. It also contributes towards increased winter deaths, repeat visits to GPs, and admissions to hospitals. So it has a lot of impact on public health and well-being. Fuel poverty is caused by low income, unaffordable housing prices, poor quality private rental housing, and poor energy efficiency. One of the things that we've sought to do in our Staffordshire Moorlands climate change strategy is to look at the co-benefits of tackling climate change. So if we support action to reduce emissions from our homes by improving energy efficiency, we also have that important co-benefit of improved health and well-being for people here across the Staffordshire Moorlands. This is why we've included action to reduce fuel poverty within our plans, because we know this is such an important issue, particularly in light of the current cost of living crisis that we face as a country. This seminar comes at a time when we are seeing global increases in fuel prices, adding to other increases to the cost of living, as I was just saying. So I'm pleased to introduce this event today to raise awareness of this really important issue that affects so many of our families in the Staffordshire Moorlands. And it's important that we can highlight the good work that is taking place across our district and hopefully point people in the right direction support if they need it, because it's really important that as a council and all the partners that are on this call, that we can be there on the front line to help those in their time of need, particularly at the moment. So for today's event, I would ask that you please keep your cameras off and put yourself on mute when you are not speaking. There will be an opportunity after each speaker for questions, and the session will be posted onto the council's YouTube channel for anyone who wishes to watch the presentations and contributions later on. Please use your networks to make sure that as many people as possible get to know about the important information that we're discussing in this event today. I hope that you all find this session very useful, and I will now pass you to our first speaker. Thank you very much.
Matthew, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think I've been muted by. Sorry, it was taking a while for the unmute button to unmute me. And I'm just about to upload the slides, so bear with me a second. So Kim and I did a dummy run a few moments ago, and it was absolutely fine. So I'll be with you in 1 second. I'm sorry, it's just taking a couple of seconds. So if you take a gulp of your tea and right, I think we're almost ready. It's slowly loading, I'm sorry. Right, I think we're almost ready to go. I've got a countdown timer. It says it'll be there in 4 seconds. Here we go. Brilliant. Right, thanks so much for your time, and sorry for it taking a couple of moments to upload. So as Councillor Porter mentioned a couple of moments ago, energy has never ever been more topical. From the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow a few months back and the brave new world of net zero, to the 54% price increase that customers across the moorlands will see from the 1st of April, and the ever increasing spectre of a £3,000 a year energy bill from October, and worse, the reality of fuel poverty. And so over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about fuel crisis, self-disconnection, energy rationing, and my organisation, the Fuel Bank Foundation. I'll also share the Fuel Bank's latest research and insight based on what real people, that's over 1,000 of them, told us at the end of last year. My name is Matthew Cole, and I head up the Fuel Bank Foundation, and I'm really proud to have worked alongside Kim over the last 5 years or so. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to raise them, either as I'm going or at the end, whatever works best for you. It's hard to believe that in 2022, some families live without the heat, light and power they need because they don't have the money they need to top up their prepayment meter. We call that fuel crisis. Fuel Bank Foundation is the only national charity whose sole focus is to provide immediate, tangible, meaningful and long-lasting help to people living in fuel crisis. Every year, the demand for our services increases. Our vision is a country where everybody has access to the energy they need for heating and eating. We also know that people rarely contact their energy supplier for help, so we work with selected food banks, charities and advice agencies to identify those households that are genuinely in fuel crisis. We help through providing emergency, same-day electronic top-ups to simply get prepayment meters running again, to get the gas flowing, to get the electricity back on again. All requests are validated and made by trusted third parties and are validated again to tease out fraud and repeat applicants, and are wrapped in simple, easy to action advice that is relevant for those who prepay. Everything we do is about avoiding dependency. And after 6 years, we now have over 149 partners across the country. We rely on them to spot the people who are really struggling to cope. And to date, we've helped over 500,000 people. The folk we support are those who can't afford to pay in advance for household energy because they have no money. These are the ones who live in cold homes, are unable to cook a hot meal for their family or have a shower before a job interview. They've often fallen through every other safety net, so we provide around 10 days worth of fuel alongside targeted advice to give them some breathing space. Many of us today are already feeling the squeeze right now and wondering how we'll pay for ever increasing energy bills in the future. But the people we support today are regularly living without energy now. They've already made all the savings they can in their household budgets and still don't always have the money they need to top up their prepayment meters. Or, if living off the gas grid, unable to fill their oil tank or log store. It's really terrifying to think about the impact of the forthcoming price rise on them. The findings from our research will paint a picture of their lives and give them a voice to tell you their stories. In the period before Fuel Bank stepped in, over 19 out of 20 people we supported were having to choose between heating or eating. Nearly half were rationing hot water daily. Our clients tell us about the stark reality of limiting showering and household laundry. 14% of the people we help were sacrificing hot food daily. To put this into context, a year ago, this figure was 1%. Our model is to provide crisis help to support people in the moment to get them to a better place. But a mixture of economics, the simple cost of living, and the impact of COVID has led to the disappearance of the resilience that people once had. Put simply, that resilience, be it friends who can help or an emergency £5 in the back of a cupboard, it's been spent or lent or didn't exist in the first place. Half the people we support still face self-disconnection at least weekly. And almost 4 in 5 people strongly agree that the rising energy costs cause them alarm. To put into context, there is more alarm to our client group about the impact of energy cost than there was about the removal of the £20 universal credit uplift back in the autumn. So it's not surprising that we've seen a 75% increase in need year on year. November was a record month for Fuel Bank until December happened, and January smashed December, but not in a good way. And perhaps unsurprisingly, February beat January and March is now busier than ever. Typically, we're now helping around 1,500 people every day. That's 1,500 people who are living without electricity and gas. And this is the issue. If there's one slide to kind of take away and remember, this is the one. We support those people who have to pay in advance for their energy. You also need to be mindful that those people who have a prepayment meter are also more likely to have limited banking facilities, a tighter household budget, and less access to rainy day savings. This is just fact. It's hard to disagree with. But when you pay for energy just before you use it, you also have to be able to afford, in real time, the seasonal peaks in energy consumption. Because if you can't afford it, the lights turn off, the gas stops flowing. Look at the value of the average monthly direct debit payments over the next 15 months or so. You can see in the orange bars how the average monthly direct debit payment increases from April as a result of the new cap and again in October. And we've assumed that annual bills reach £3,000 by then, particularly as a result of sanctions against Russia. That's kind of where analysts are predicting energy bills will end up. The key thing is for a direct debit customer, you can see that their payments are smooth. There's 3 very clear amounts people need to pay. Compare this, though, to those who prepay, and that's kind of the pinky purpley colour. because these people find as winter bites, they'll be facing significant monthly charges and challenges to keep their meters going. So much so, by January, we estimate that the average prepayment meter customer will need to top up by around £15 a day. They'll be facing a monthly charge of around £425, £430. And at the same time, we assess the average smooth monthly direct debit payment will be around £250. And you can kind of see the tragedy unfolding for families on low incomes and without the resilience they need at the moment. And energy isn't the only problem our clients are having to navigate. We've seen a 24% year-on-year reduction in the number of people with children who receive free school meals. This suggests that we're starting to see people who are new to poverty, new to crisis, who are living without heat, light and power, but for whatever reason, aren't necessarily eligible for other help. And so perhaps understandably, 3/4 of the people we help today are still struggling with other household bills. Essential bills that you need to pay to keep a roof over your head, to feed your kids, to travel to work. We're not talking here about a Netflix subscription or a cheeky Nando's. These went a long, long time ago, if ever they even happened in the first place. People we're supporting are in abject poverty and continue to fear they will be in the future. What we do see, however, is the immense power and benefit of the crisis help we provide through getting meters going again to the families we support. Because in getting the house warm, enabling kids to have a warm shower, in allowing our clients to make a cup of tea and sit down, complete an official form for help or whatever, we deliver significant improvements in both mental and physical well-being across the household. We also provide hope that living with energy doesn't have to become the new business as usual for that family forever. What our families go through, though, is so often hidden from view. Because let's face it, self-disconnection, or when a prepayment meter switches off because of lack of funds, isn't something that is talked about every day. Also, really sadly, I'm sure it's something that Kim will back me up on. It's also something which many people just accept happens when it happens to them. It's just the way they live their life. And that's why within the Fuel Bank Foundation, we think it's really important to spend time talking and listening to the people we've supported, to hear their stories, and to ensure that the services we provide are impactful and, above all, make a difference. The Chancellor's already announced a support package to run alongside increasing costs that households will be facing. And although we welcome some support being made available to local authorities such as Staffordshire Moorlands, we need to go further and deeper if we're to address the issues we see at Fuel Bank and in our client base. As the Councillor mentioned a few moments ago, comprehensive energy efficiency is needed to lift people out of fuel poverty, but this takes time and it takes money. And so in the meantime, crisis financial support is needed to mitigate the increased energy costs that our client group will face this year and beyond. And that is why, as a minimum, to ensure that more people don't fall into fuel poverty or need crisis help from Fuel Bank, support is needed to cover the forecast increase in energy costs and must be simple and easy to access. To be really clear, we're not asking that the impact of the price increase is mitigated for every household across the country, but it absolutely is where households don't have the resilience to weather the storm. Because our existing Fuel Bank clients are already in that situation. We propose that those who receive and are eligible, for warm home discount should receive extra support. Last year, a number of people who are eligible missed out, and it's essential that if you're eligible, you should receive it. Any warm home discount payments made available should be absolutely ring-fenced for energy, and be of an amount to close the gap caused by the price increase, because that will ensure that families don't go cold. Furthermore, they should be staged to ensure that there's funding available to pay for electricity and gas in periods of high consumption over the winter. And it's really important to recognise that sometimes people need more support. And so programmes such as the Fuel Bank need to secure additional funding to ensure that a safety net exists if, for whatever reason, families fall through a crack. And in terms of funding, simply adding costs to energy bills just adds to the problem. Current warm home discount and the proposed £200 October energy credit will simply be funded by energy customers. The cost of the support which has been provided will be funded largely by energy consumers. These are the same people who are already picking up the cost of supplier failure. Energy costs now take up a high proportion of poorer household budgets, and so on the eve of the largest increase we have ever seen. Now is a time for us to properly examine how we can move to a more progressive model to fund crisis energy support and proper, decent and impactful fuel poverty intervention. So thank you so much. I hope that was useful, and I think we might have time for any questions. So Kim, shall I hand back over to you?
I think you're coming back to me, Matthew. Thank you for that. That was that was very interesting, if a little bit worrying. In terms of the support, can I just start off with one question? So if people want to access support, they can't find you directly, then they go through a referral system, do they, from different organisations?
Yeah, kind of. So about 95% of people access our help via our partner network. So you'll probably find us in sort of 350, 400 locations across the country now. But we do, as a charity, we do respond to direct referrals too. So we try to process those requests and look at them as if they'd come via a third party. So we'll do additional validation and verification of need. But our main channel is through organisations which are either community-based or national. And you'll see, you know, people like Citizens Advice, Trussell Trust, Macmillan. You know, we work with a number of high street organisations as well as really, really local organisations too.
Thank you. I think we've got a couple of questions. Councillor Corley, I think you were first.
Yes, thanks. I've only got a limited amount of time, mainly because we have a Leek Town Council climate change meeting at 2. So I wanted to get my point in, and we'll probably have to leave. Unfortunately, have to leave the meeting before. But anyway, I have 2 or 3 points I'd like to make. The first point is about prepayment meters. In 2010-11, we lived in Broad Street in Leek and had a prepayment meeting. It was an exceptionally cold December and January in 2010-11, and quite often, you know, the amount of money that a prepayment meter devoured. I think I read somewhere that, you know, energy costs for prepayment meters are about 30 to 35% higher than would be if you were on a normal tariff. Perhaps the gentleman might talk about this, but prepayment meters, particularly for people on low incomes, are a fact of life. And I just wondered about, you know, do we have any data in terms of SMDC, or how many people are on prepayment meters? I mean, it was, to say, from my memory, we often had to go to bed because we didn't have the income really to afford to put the prepayment meter topped up. So that's my first question, really, about prepayment meters and the effect in the locality. I'll just come through as I say, because I've got a limited amount of time. Okay. The second one is about insulation and retrofit, and the government won fabric first approach. In terms of, I wonder whether funding streams are going to be available soon, and what will Staffordshire Moorlands District Council do to ensure. Can you take your office? Okay, I'm sorry about that. My mobile phone just went off. But anyway, the point is that in terms of insulation retrofit, I had heard that some of the worst housing in terms of energy loss are those built in the 1960s and 70s. So I just wondered if you had any information in terms of what this is probably for the officer really, are doing to get ready the whole issue around insulation and retrofit. And finally, energy efficiency ratings and new powers and requirements for SMDC. It's now in the targets as far as the aiming low document is concerned. How many inspectors have been appointed by SMDC, and how many is our SMDC aiming to employ in terms of ensuring energy efficiency ratings are met. Those are my 3 points. As I say, I have to dash at for another meeting at 2, but I thought I needed to get these points across before, mainly for the benefit of SMDC officers and councillors who are watching.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Corley. Shall I respond, David? Is that okay on the first question?
Yeah, if you could, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so excuse me, sorry, I'm just choking here. I think, as the councillor rightly says, that prepayment meters are a way of life for many consumers, especially consumers with low income. One of the things we're really conscious of is a lot of charities talk around maybe prepayment metering is a legacy of the past and we should get rid of it immediately. In honesty, there's real acceptance for prepayment metering from the client group we support. So it's about 15% or so of people across the UK across GB, so have a prepayment meter. But it kind of works for them. It kind of suits people's way of living. You know, it allows you to avoid being in debt. And the alternative sometimes is kind of having, you know, getting quarterly bills or paying by direct debit, which sometimes doesn't work for people. I just need to correct the council on one point, because the government has, in collaboration with the energy sector over the last decade, have brought prepayment meter tariff rates to comparable figures as if you pay by direct debit or pay when a quarterly bill comes through the door. So if you look at the price cap at the moment, or the price cap energy bill, which goes live from the 1st of April, yes, there's a slight saving if you pay by direct debit, but prepayment and receiving a quarterly bill are equitable within a few pounds. So I think, although maybe in the past prepayment was maybe sold at a premium, that hasn't been the case now for maybe the last decade or so. And that's partly, if I'm honest, because the energy sector has recognised that there's a higher propensity for folk to be more disadvantaged to have a prepayment meter. I guess the retrofit question, the energy efficiency rating questions, are probably more for officers of the council rather than for me.
Thank you, Matthew. And I think some of those points hopefully we've picked up on the agenda. We've got Joel, for instance, talking about the Staffordshire Warm Homes Fund. But if there's anything that doesn't get picked up, Councillor Corley, we can get a response to you. Councillor Yates.
I know that Nigel's waiting to come in, but as I say, I have a meeting at 2, but I just wanted to get those points clear before I have to leave the meeting. As I hope that's understood. Okay, thanks.
Yes, right, it's my turn now.
Hello.
Hello there. Hi. Very good. Yes, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting. That graph certainly is quite alarming, because I think it's fair to say those who are sort of scrabbling around and struggling one week to the next with low incomes can't really get in a position where they're actually building ahead in preparation for that catastrophe, which is going to be December to February next year. And it's hard to see any sort of really easy way out of that. The only thing I will say, I mean, from prepayment meter point of view, I think any difference between the medium in charges, I realise that, you know, it's only a smaller premium now against direct debit payments, is a mole in this day and age. And really, you know, the problem with a lot of slight political point, the problem with a lot of the incentives which come from central government at the moment are sort of geared to those who can actually have got a little bit of investment themselves to put money down. So they tend to be, you know, targeted to the sort of middle classes and whatever. And I'm referring to things like heat pumps and whatever, where there's the pronouncement that they are, you know, they've taken VAT off heat pumps, very good, but it doesn't really help the people at the bottom. They're looking at a sort of loan system for installing these things. It doesn't help the people at the bottom. So I think in the short term, certainly for the next 18 months or so, we've got a number of crises which are coming to us. I think any help which comes from local government at all levels has got to be targeted on those who are receiving the warm home discount or are in the lower incomes bracket, as personified by the use of prepayment meters. So I would like to think there's a system of extending some kind of energy survey to those who've still got prepayment meters, and perhaps there's an education where some of them could perhaps move over to direct debit and whatever, and that information should be available. I think we've got to look at every aspect of getting information, but certainly to me, if somebody's got a prepayment meter at this moment in time, that flags up a particular issue with at least understanding, but most likely problems with low income, problems with poverty. I'd like to see a push at all levels to actually promote. I'll have to look into the Warm Staffordshire grant, but I keep searching for grants and things and don't particularly see anything available. We've got to push on these people who are in the situation where they're getting warm home discounts and prepayment meters to get the insulation up to standard, to get LED lighting fitting all the way across. They are simple, cheap, effective and immediate returns, and that's where we need, to me, to prioritise things, and that's where central government should be leading the way, but the different tiers of local government should follow up. We should be offering that help and that advice and actually being proactive in finding these things. Anything which we do will help to meet the climate change targets as well, so there's none of this which is absolutely wasted, but that graph is something which should be shown and promoted and issued to every single councillor. And what always worries me about presentations like this, which happen, in a working week afternoon, is the attendances are low. I know we've got a lot of retired councillors, and I am a little bit disappointed at the numbers who are attending today, as if climate change is somebody else's problem. But it isn't. It's all our residents' problems. And again, a little bit like Bill, I must apologise. I have got to disappear at 2 o'clock, but I'll for a works meeting on Teams. But I will be avidly listening to the rest of the presentation. So as soon as it can be distributed to all councillors, David, that would be of most benefit.
Do you want me to respond, David? Is that okay, or would that be useful? Quickly. Ooh. David, you're on mute, I think.
Matthew, could you pick up the point as well that Councillor Corley asked about if there are any figures of the numbers on prepayment meters? Do we have that sort of information?
I do, but not with me, so I'll revert on that if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll get the things back to you. And thank you ever so much for the comments a few moments ago. I remember when I was doing my GCSE mocks many years ago, my geography teacher said forearmed is prepared, or prepared is forearmed, whatever that saying is. And I think that was kind of the theme of the previous councillor's comments, actually, that it's getting warmer now, but as sure as eggs are eggs, it's going to become winter in 6 months' time. And so I think doing the prep work up front to understand people's propensity to be in a crisis come next autumn, come next winter, is a really sensible thing. And I fully concur with the comments about using warm home discount, using prepayment as a proxy, not simply to assume that people will be in trouble, but to understand whether they could be. I think the only thing I'd say is that a lot of people have prepayment who are low income, but a lot of people have prepayment and aren't low income at all. It's just, it kind of suits the way they live their life, and that can be in holiday lets, but it can also be for lots of kind of professional folk who maybe first or second job post university, often pay by prepayment, so there isn't so much of a fuel poverty issue there. But I think it's really good as a starting point to understand what's the risk profile for people with a prepayment meter. What I would say, and I know this isn't like a sales thing, we work with a number of local authorities already where, regardless of where people pop up, we provide crisis fuel bank help for people. That could be something which maybe SMDC might want to maybe explore in more detail later on. We've done this in a number of kind of rural, urban and inner city local authority areas. And it's worked quite successfully, actually, because I think before you can have a proper conversation about retrofit or grants or other things you might be able to access, it's really hard to do it with people living in a cold home. If people don't have electricity and gas on, it's really hard for them to think straight about what they might be able to do. So welcome to have a longer conversation if that would be useful, David, at some point.
Definitely, yes.
Cool.
Let's have that conversation. Yeah.
If I can just come back just for a second. One what I'd like to say is, yes, I agree with exactly what Matthew said about prepayment meters. It doesn't mean that if you've got a prepayment meter, you're necessarily in poverty, but what it is, it's a market. It's one of those flags which comes up to say, to sort of understand the reasoning. And I think if that information is available, it gives a list of names and addresses to at least contact to see what the reasoning is. And then you might find that it's like the usual 80-20. 80% of those with a prepayment meter might not have a problem, but it gives a target to that 20 who have got a problem, and they may be missing out on existing grants, never mind the fact that they should be prioritised over middle class discounts for air source heat pumps, which inflation's got to come first anyway, which we should be doing now, because we've got a 6-month window of opportunity. After that, we really are going to be firefighting, or the equivalent to firefighting in the freezing cold.
Yeah, I think the point you made as well about making sure that other councillors were aware of that graph. This is really old school, isn't it? I've got like a paper version of our fuel crisis report, which you've seen today. I can quite happily provide some of these to you via Kim if that would be useful, because then you kind of got a physical piece of paper on a proper document from us, which people can digest and read. We find more people who have a paper copy of this, it kind of seems to land a little bit better. And we're actually with the board of Ofgem this afternoon showing the same presentation. So you're kind of one step ahead of Jonathan Brealey and co at Ofgem. So, you know, if you want paper copies, please just let me know and we'll provide them to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Could we move on at that point to our next speaker? But thank you very much, Matthew. That was really helpful. And if you could provide some of the hard copies, councillors, I could bring them along to the next communities meeting. We could make them available there.
Brilliant. We'll do that. Kim, I'll pick up with you, and thank you ever so much for the invite, and enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
David, can we have an electronic copy as well, please?
Yeah, of
So
course.
it's easier to circulate, but lovely idea, paper. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Thomas, are you there? Are you ready to deliver your presentation? Oh, I can see you there. Good.
Hi, David. Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'll start sharing my screen now. Is that coming across okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fab. Thank you. So, Beat the Cold, we are your energy advice support mechanism. Beat the Cold, we're a Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent based charity. They've got a real rich history of being the backbone for the areas for over 2 decades now. So real rich experience in terms of support and energy advice for Staffordshire Moorland residents. We've got a good reputation. So we've previously worked with the government Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, SBAIS, and Ofgem as well. So the Office for Gas and Electricity Markets. So hopefully that gives you a real good idea about the longevity of our services and the reputation that we've got for really offering some really comprehensive help and support around energy advice. And some of the stats that Matthew had, I'm kind of emulating to some extent, but for me, it really highlights just how pertinent our services are and Matthew's services are, as well as other people that we're going to listen to today, just how important it is to reach as many residents for Staffordshire Moorlands as possible. You know, it's our opportunity to really disseminate key messages and to make sure that all residents are aware of the support that we offer. I think it's absolutely paramount, especially with the increases of cost of living going up, the price cap increase. It's really going to be a difficult time for many households, especially when we know that 70 to 80% of the working population you know, don't always have a contingency fund to call upon of maybe 2 or 3 months worth of income and savings to pay for unexpected bills or emergencies that may occur, and that's for the working population. So for the retired or the more vulnerable, where they're not working, are going to be potentially in a worse off position. So it really highlights the need to, you know, equip the residents with as many tools and knowledge as possible. You know, knowledge is power. I think some of the councillors have already talked about that today. It's about being preventative as well as curative. So what we really aim to do is to arm the residents with as much support as possible and information, and really just kind of following on for from Matthew's details of why that's so important. And when we look about fuel poverty, and really the government use that as a low income, low energy efficiency of households, and of how many people that may be affected. So moving into April this year, potentially 6.5 million, up from 4 million last year. And if it does go to 3,000, as Matthew alluded, you know, it could be almost 8.5 million households. That's almost a third of the households that could fall into that fuel poverty piece. So particularly that's a household with a low energy efficiency of D or below, and where they're expected to fall into that poverty line of any residual income they have left after spending money on their household bills. And ultimately, three variables that really affect that is their income, the energy efficiency of the household, and fuel prices. So all those combined really amalgamate to why it's so important to make people aware of our support. And when we're having that touch point with the resident, hopefully what gives you great peace of mind is that holistic support that we offer. You know, it's really about arming them, as I said, with the tools to combat the challenges that we face ourselves in now and moving forward, if we can be as preventative as possible. It's about making them feel as confident, you know, in such a challenging time that we're in, to give them energy advice, to look at behavioural change, to input changes now so they won't be as impacted, even though it's going to be so difficult for many of us. Assisting them with understanding energy bills. If they've got any outstanding problems with a certain provider, that's where we can step in and help them. And that's why we're really client-led from the first step all the way to the end. In terms of that client journey, we're there to hold the residents' hands along the way. Also look at supporting them financially. So income maximisation. So if you're aware that the resident may be applicable for certain benefits that they're not claiming, then we can support them with that and make them aware of it. Ultimately, they'll have to speak to DWP and claim them, but we can at least highlight that to them. And really talk about Western Power priority services. So for any vulnerable clients and residents where they reliable on a medical emergency, tools to help them around the household, or potentially any medicine that they need. So if there was a power cut, they can still access those devices, I think is absolutely priority, as well as working collaboratively with other companies, organisations we work with. So Severn Trent, South Tass Water, so they're big water, they're big different schemes. That's something we can assist the residents with, where they can also save money there anywhere between 20 to 90% on their bills. So it's about empowering them with the information, making sure they've got as much income as possible, making sure that we can help and support lower their bills on top of the energy advice that we offer. So it's really important to offer that and highlight that holistic support. And I know that we've got Joel with us today, and he could be able to talk to you this in a bit of greater detail. But what we can also really do and assist the clients, and what I think one of the councillors asked this question earlier, is to help them with measures around the household. So we work very closely with Staffs County Council and Staff Moorlands District, as well as E.ON, as part of that Staffordshire Warmer Homes programme, the ECO, the Green Home Grants for the LAD, so the local authority delivery schemes. And it's really about, you know, insulation. It's about keeping the warmth into the household as best as possible, especially when we know that 65% of people's gas electricity bills, in terms of what they're spending the money on, is to heat the home. It's so important to keep that residual heat in, as you can see, in terms of the heat loss through the household. So it's really taking that fabric first approach, I think, is going to be imperative, and then to look at, you know, more renewables moving forward, and that transition to low carbon heating in the likes of air source heat pumps and solar. So it's really important that we're there to assist you with that journey. And these are fully funded and schemes that the residents can call upon. In particular, people on low income, if they're high vulnerability, if they've got low EPCs, you know, these are the kind of clientele and target audiences that we're focusing on to assist them and to make sure their home is as safe and warm as possible. And it's through our close working relationship with E.ON that we're able to help them along that journey. I've also included some numbers to highlight some of the great support we've been able to help residents of Staffordshire Moorlands District Council over the last quarter. So that's from November to December. Over 100 households we've been able to help. And just to show you the holistic support available, how many people we've been able to help, for example, the warm home discount. Ultimately, that's dictated to when the energy provider has that opportunities to apply for that, of how many people we've been able to help, the number of people who signed up to the Western Power Priority Services, the water tariff support, food vouchers that we've given. So again, as Matthew alluded to earlier, how important it is to look at those elements of support. How many people have been able to help and improve their well-being? You know, it's very much interlinked. You know, if you're struggling with your finances, it could have a detrimental effect on your mental well-being, and conversely, if you struggle with your mental well-being, it makes managing your finances more difficult. So if we're able to help people financially, as you can see on the screen and on previous slides, as well as empower them with the information and tools and knowledge to take ownership of this crisis that we unfortunately find ourselves in, it's about giving them and empowering them to feel more confident and positive. And it's very much an interlinked cycle. You know, all these pillars are very much interlinked, and we try our best to support that resident in those areas as best as possible. And in particular as well, because of our close working relationship with Staffordshire County Council, we were instrumental in supporting them with their winter pressures scheme recently, where residents could apply for a voucher up to £350 to support them with the increase in bills. And we've actually referred over 200 residents since December up until March. So again, it just shows you the scale and magnitude of support and the number of people we've been able to help with that, as well as also offer other help in terms of energy advice. And again, for your peace of mind, I've included a list of respected partners that we currently work with. We work with all the district councils and borough councils as a part of Staffordshire County Council, bar one, of which we're very proud to say Staffordshire Moorlands are one, as well as Stoke-on-Trent. You know, we've got links to both primary and secondary care across the districts and the regions, because it's really important, again, to access that most vulnerable tranche of clients, and try and be preventative as well as curative, as I keep mentioning. Our close working partnership with E.ON, where we'll be able to refer more people moving forward in terms of that kind of sustainable warmth competition that's due to launch, in terms of the local authority delivery schemes and the home upgrade grants for anyone off the gas grid. Our contact details, again, our helpline available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. People can call us, as we will then also conduct telephone assessments with people and do home visits, so an amalgamation of the two, and really that's dictated to by the needs of that resident and their circumstances they find themselves in. Obviously before COVID we would conduct a lot more home visits, and during COVID that wasn't possible, and we've actually found that a lot of people have found the telephone support and advice just as useful. The majority. There will be certain cases where we have to go and see the individual at their home to give them that more in-depth help and support, but really it's going to be client-led, and we will always do what's right by the resident when they contact us. There's also an example of someone we've been able to help and support on the screen, as you can see. I'll let you a quick read through that and my contact details. So again, thank you very much for your time today and having me on to speak. I'm just going to stop sharing and come back to the... I think there's a question there. Is that Miss Councillor calling, I believe?
I've got a few more minutes left before I disappear for this other meeting on the Big Town Council climate change. But the whole issue around, we had a very interesting conversation with someone from the health authority, worked for the provider, on health prescriptions. And I know that one of the sort of partners that flashed up in that display you had right at the end. Now, I just wonder, you mentioned that 200 people had been given vouchers, etc. at the end. I mean, is that compared to what the heating for prescription scheme that the local hospital is running, or I'm a bit unsure how their scheme sits in with yours in terms of. I thought that the scheme that was being outlined to us at the health scrutiny a week or so ago was very interesting. I just wondered where it sat in with the scheme that you're running.
It's a scheme ran via Staffordshire County Council, so they were able to acquire funding from the government to help residents with under the staff's council, county council, sorry. Anyone who in fuel poverty, anyone struggling with the increase in bills. So it's money that they've been able to obtain, and we've been able to support all applicants. So they would have applied on the Staffordshire County Council website. So it does differ to the scheme, I believe, that you've mentioned there, Councillor. So it's a separate entity to the scheme I believe you've just mentioned. And ultimately, the residents who came into us were all via inquiries into Staffordshire County Council when they highlighted that particular scheme.
Thank you, Tom. Any more questions? Might be getting off lightly there. Thank you. Going once, going twice. Thank you, Tom. I think we are very fortunate to have Beat the Cold. They've provided a fantastic service over the years, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, David.
Joel, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. You finished your food, so you're having your snack before.
Yeah, when I just logged on, I was just quickly trying to get food down me before my next meeting. Just share my screen, and as per, can you just give me a nod when you can see it?
You can see it. You might want to start your slideshow though.
All good?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Oh, good. So I'll just introduce myself quickly. So I'm Joel Stafford, work at E.ON. I've been working with David, yourself, and Kim at the Moorlands District Council for probably the best part of 3 years now, through the Staffordshire Warm Homes programme led by the County Council, of which Beat the Cold have also been supporting. So I've worked with Tom and Tom's predecessors and Tom's team throughout that time, who have been instrumental in the support, and I'll talk a bit about that when I go through my slides. Ultimately, where I sit within E.ON is within part of the business that's called Residential Solutions, and that looks after sort of any support that we can give to homes through things like smart meters. Obviously, our eco sort of team and part of the business is sat within that warm home discount, which Matt mentioned when he pulled through his slides. My team is actually sort of surrounded with green funding, and ultimately what we mean by that is any funding that isn't an obligation on us. So it isn't a warm home discount, it isn't an eco, it's anything else that we can support local authorities to bring into their area to support energy efficiency. And I think one thing that's very key about what I do, and something I'm actually quite proud of, is, you know, you've heard two good presentations today from Matt and Tom, but they've both been about sort of quite negative subjects as such as people struggling to pay their bills, and especially in Matt's presentation, it was as the bills rise, it gets harder and harder for people to pay their bills, and more people fall under that line, and more people start to struggle. And all the support they offer is absolutely fantastic. It's almost like, how can we maximise their income? There's almost a second side to that same coin, which is, well, how can we push those bills as far down as we possibly can? And the leading way of doing that, and the number one solution, really is making homes as efficient as they possibly can. And that's essentially what the Staffordshire Warmer Homes programme is about. So I'm here today really to represent that programme on behalf of the County Council, but I'm going to talk more about what that programme's already done for Staffordshire Moorlands, and then also a little bit about what's coming next. So a bit of a past, present and future presentation from me today. In terms of Staffordshire Warmer Homes programme, the first slide here, I've said, well, what is it? So essentially, three years ago, the council, Staffordshire County, decided they wanted to create a brand, essentially, and that's where Staffordshire Warmer Homes was produced. And ultimately, underneath that brand, they would want to pull in as much funding as possible. So they'd want to pull in eco funding, but they'd also want to go and pull on other pots of money that were around, whether that's through government or through CICs or another route. Ultimately, if they could bid or put a proposal in for funding, they would do that. And at the time, I remember the county council saying very clearly that they wanted it to be centrally managed and locally led. And what they meant by that was they would take, I guess, the responsibilities for reporting, making sure things are compliance, communication with the funders, which can sometimes be quite onerous, and ultimately then bring in all the partners around Staffordshire to lead that programme. They didn't want it to be seen as a county council programme, they wanted it to be seen as everyone. And I think that's evident as we've moved through the programme. Every couple of months we have a sort of working group, which is myself and my team, the county council, a few other delivery partners, Beat the Cold are there, other charities and community interest organisations such as Citizens Advice, the police service come, the fire service come, because they help out with some sort of support, sort of talking to local residents and home visits in some sense, and offer their support where they can. So it has been quite a well-rounded group there. And as I go through the presentation, you'll see some of the stuff that we've done to date, and I'll talk about some of the benefits that they've provided. But ultimately, the council's intention is to continue growing that programme and continue to bring in more funding specifically to be given to residential homes free of charge. So the whole thing is at zero cost to the people that live in the home, to provide them with energy efficiency measures, and more so in sort of current times and into the future. It's very much focused on net zero as well, so low carbon solutions. So just touch on my first slide. So this is one of two programmes that I'm going to talk about today, and it's called the Warm Homes Fund, which I'm assuming some of you would be aware of. But if not, this is a scheme that's been running probably nationally now for the past sort of 5, 6, 7 years, and this is one of the funds that Staffordshire thought, well, we'll bid for a bit of that, and we'll then deliver that funding across Staffordshire. And to date, the Warm Homes Fund has been essentially geared at giving people gas central heating systems for the first time. So it's been taking people from electric storage heaters, like you can see in the pictures, or electric room heaters, or I remember a specific case in the Moorlands actually where someone was living with a coal back boiler that didn't work anymore, so they were just using plug-in electric heaters, and it was bringing those properties and those residents sort of forward a little bit and providing them with a brand new boiler and a radiator system, and then controllability of that system through heating control. So it was really a step change in how that home could use heating, the element of controllability essential heating gives above and beyond sort of static heating, is massively beneficial. So across the duration of that project, which is very, very close to coming to a close now, we have supported over 100 houses across Staffordshire to receive this benefit. And of those, 30 of them are in Staffordshire and Moorlands. So 30 individual households have benefited from this scheme across the last sort of 2.5 years. I just looked at some quick stats from sort of the database today, and of those 30, 12 of them already had a gas connection, so they just needed the boiler and the central heating. 18 of them needed to be connected to the gas grid, so that was completely facilitated as well. And so it's the complete journey from having no ability to use gas to then having the ability to use gas, and then also having a nice central heating system that runs off that as well. And alongside all of this, as Tom touched on, if there was any other, I guess, vulnerabilities or any other services that we could offer, such as income maximisation through the benefit checks, or whether we could offer them discounts on their water bill through partnerships with utilities like Severn Trent, or whether it was just as simple as talking to these residents, talking to the householders, understanding their understanding of energy and how to use it. It's those kind of services that actually Beat the Cold have been really instrumental at being able to provide. And actually that takes the scheme from being really positive and yes, people get a nice new install and their energy bills go down, but ultimately it's also about sustaining the behaviour that's required to make the most of them. And that's where charities like Beat the Cold are absolutely paramount to running energy efficiency schemes and being able to offer these in a way that's really, really impactful and, as I said, sustainable. In terms of the spend, it accounts to about £180,000 worth of funding, and the Warm Homes Fund is a blend of private funding through the fund, and we also then top that up with ECO to make sure that it was fully funded to all of the residents. So across this scheme, there wasn't a single penny paid out by the residents of the homes, and obviously they'd have to qualify. And so we really are targeting those on the lowest of income, should we say, because I think some of the councillors, when they were sort of talking through and asking some questions, I think the new air source heat pump scheme was highlighted as one that's great, but people still need a bit of capital to be able to get onto that. Schemes run through Staffordshire Warmer Homes are completely zero cost, and they're targeted at people who are below a certain income threshold, or they're on a means tested benefit. So it really is trying to look for the people that are truly struggling and have the least financial sort of capabilities to do this themselves. In terms of estimated bill savings, I was umming and ahhing a little bit about whether putting that on the slides was a good idea today, especially with all the sort of conversations around bills rising. But ultimately, I thought it was a good example to kind of say, look, these interventions, these additions to houses, actually do have immediate impacts. And at the time, we're talking sort of 2 years ago, moving from a really inefficient set of electric storage heaters. The example I gave of someone moving from a coal system, and in some areas of Staffordshire, we've actually moved people off, oil, LPG, wood chips, for example. Replacing them with an efficient heating system actually saves them sort of around £300 a year on their heating bill at the time. And so immediately they were being able to generate those savings. So it has immediate impacts. And I think what I would say at this moment in time around the kind of bill saving question, ultimately we all know energy bills are going up. Having these interventions are going to push that down as much as possible. So whilst we might be seeing these rises, if you invest in these sort of systems, if you invest in other energy efficiency measures, you're going to limit that rise as much as possible. So the impact of those rises will be as minimised as they can be. And so it's really important to continue with these sort of stuff. So I've continued to talk about bill savings as we move forwards. And moving on, and this is kind of geared towards where the industry is going, I think, and it would probably aligned quite well with the meeting that a few of the councillors have gone to. I've just talked about the Warm Homes Fund, which was great, but I talked about gas central heating systems, which gas prices are rising massively. It's not a low carbon fuel. At the time, it was an intervention that really supported people. But if we're thinking more into the future, we're thinking net zero and we're thinking low carbon, and gas boilers aren't part of that conversation. And so another scheme that's being run through Staffordshire Warmer Homes is called the Green Homes Grant. Not being confused with the Green Homes Grant voucher scheme. This was a scheme where Staffordshire County Council and other local authorities around the country could bid directly into government for substantial funding towards low carbon measures, so insulation, air source heat pumps or the low carbon heat, and then micro generation, which is your solar panels, for example. And this is a real step change because suddenly you've got multi-measures available to people in Staffordshire. It's not just gas central heating systems, there's options, and we can start to flex what we can offer compared to what the house wants. And so we can start to solve more problems than just heating. And that's really, really important. I think you probably hear a lot in the press and sort of when you have conversations around net zero and climate change and decarbonisation and the housing stock, probably something you hear quite a lot is the phrase fabric first. And so what fabric first means is if you're going to look at a house that's inefficient and the bills are really high, ultimately you could go and put a brand new heating system in there. Great, it would have some impact, but ultimately if that house is not insulated, the heat is just escaping out of the walls, out of the windows, out of the roof. And referring back to sort of, I think it was the last but one slide in Tom's presentation, there was a sort of graph of a house and it showed kind of heat being lost, and heat being lost out of walls is something incredible, like sort of 45-ish% of where the heat's lost. So you can intervene and do the heating system, but unless you can wrap the property, unless you can do the solid wall insulation, the cavity wall insulation, that heat's going to get lost, so the benefit's not maximised. So being able to grow that and start to add things like insulation really gives another step change to the programme. And this is an area of the programme that is just growing and growing and growing. And so there's been multiple phases so far. Phase one was kind of like the tester. It was quite a small programme, as you can see from the sort of numbers generally. And there wasn't a whole load of sort of budget available, but it's probably quite a good thing because you could test the water, test the supply chain. In terms of the moorlands there, 7 properties benefited and they got 7 measures, and you can see it was a bit of a blend. So we trialled a heat pump with smart heating controls on a property that was already insulated. We upgraded the doors and windows of a property that was already insulated. So that was taking someone from single glazing still up to brand new double glazing. And then there was some solar PV put on there, and then some insulation, some loft insulation, some cavity wall insulation. About £50,000 was spent in that phase. And again, I've put the estimated bill savings at probably around about £300 per property, but it varies with measures. Solar PV could be anywhere up to 500, depending on how many panels they got on there. Things like loft insulation and cavity obviously vary with the size of the house. You then move on to phase 2, which has been what I'm still currently working on, and that's been a whole year scheme with a slightly bigger budget. And at the moment, I'm expecting 34 properties to benefit in the Moorlands, and they're going to benefit from a combined total of 44 measures. So we're starting to look at 2 measures into the same property here. And an example of that is some of the properties receiving heat pumps are also getting their loft insulation done as well, because when we went to the property, did all the surveys, it was realised that their loft insulation was insufficient to maximise the benefit of the heat pump. But you'll see that there's been a bit of an upgrade in a lot of those measures. So we're doing more heat pumps, we're doing more solar PV, and I think most importantly, we're also doing solid wall insulation or external wall insulation, which I think, if I think about the Moorlands in general, from my time when I've been down and visited and spent time with residents, there's a lot of properties in certain areas. You know, I've been to Leek and I've walked around and I've seen some of their properties. I've been to more rural areas. I've been up to like Biddulph Moor, for example, where, you know, there isn't really any gas there. It's all LPG and oil. There's some really quite large properties, and a lot of them are solid wall built. And you know, the biggest problem with those properties is probably the fact that there's no insulation around the walls and heat's just escaping. So being able to start introducing that solution, I guess, to Staffordshire Moorlands has been really, really positive. And I put the estimated spend, it's probably going to come in at about £300,000 for phase 2 in the Staffordshire Moorlands. And again, the bill savings probably work out about 350 at the minute. Take that with a pinch of salt, because what we're saying to residents at the moment is, if you looked at your bill in March, had the measure, and then looked at your bill sort of in the summer, you might not see that level of saving, but what you shouldn't see is a significant rise. So ultimately getting this measure should hopefully counteract to an extent the bill rises, which is obviously a really, really good thing. I said my final slide was going to be more around what's coming next, because this is just growing and growing and growing. And I think sort of centrally, my own thoughts, this is becoming more and more of the path to net zero. And so there's multiple schemes that are growing out of Staffordshire Warmer Homes. The Sustainable Warmth Competition and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. 2 slightly different schemes, and I'll just sort of outline what they are, and ultimately talk around sort of what they aim to do. Sustainable Warmth Competition is the next round of Green Homes Grant, essentially phase 3, but it's been expanded again and split into 2 sub-schemes. One's called LAD, which stands for Local Authority Delivery, and a second element, which is called HUG, which is a nice little name, and it stands for Home Upgrade Grant. Essentially, the difference is LAD's for residents that already have a gas connection and gas heating. HUG is very much for off-gas residents. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking that's very good for certain areas of Staffordshire Moorlands, particularly the more rural areas. The measures are still exactly the same. The solutions that can be offered, it's still exactly the same. It's just 2 separate pots of properties, essentially. The County Council has put in a proposal for up to £5 million of that to be split between each district, including the Moorlands. So obviously you can see that step change again, growing more to do more insulation, more low carbon heat, and more micro generation. So the benefits are going to continue to rise and rise and rise. I think what I would say, based on my experience in the last few years, is sometimes actually one of the hardest things is generating the amount of interest in the sort of local area to deliver this. But ultimately, I think what we are finding, and probably backed up by probably what Tom and team are finding at the moment, is actually, in light of recent news, we're becoming more and more inundated with applications. You know, more and more people are picking up the phone, more and more people are searching on Google, for example, energy efficiency, lower bills, etc., and they're finding out about schemes like this. But ultimately, these are the kind of things that please be shouting about. I've worked with Kim for the last 3 years. We've been working on targeted mail shots to try and get areas of the district that are most at risk but ultimately any help or any direction from you guys have weighed where you think this sort of support should be targeted to and specific communities that could benefit the most, always going to be listening to that, because as I said right at the start, it's centrally managed but ultimately locally led, and ultimately the districts are very involved in sort of directing us to certain areas. And then the final programme I'm just going to touch on quickly is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So slightly separately, but probably the name sort of speaks for itself. Social housing decarb is for social housing, so for council owned stock and housing association stock. Wave 1's just been awarded. Wave 2 is coming imminently, but essentially it's in line with the programme and the intention of central government to make sure that all rented properties are at least an EPC-C. I think by 2030 now that target keeps coming down. It's something that's been spoken about at a county level, but no bid's gone in or no proposals gone in. Housing associations are involved in the Staffordshire Warm Homes programming generally, so some of them benefited from some properties in the Warm Homes Fund, and ultimately it's something we could look at. I'm not 100% sure of which housing associations are active in the Moorlands, but it's an opportunity I would be encouraging them to take up, because ultimately, and all these things add up and the benefits add up, and more that you can offer, the more suppressed those bill pressures are. So ultimately, the general message is these schemes are out there. There are ways to apply on the Staffordshire County Council website, through Beat the Cold as another route, and I can provide all that detail to all of you to distribute. And if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. That's me done, David.
Thank you very much, Joe.
I'll just unshare my screen so people can see me.
Has anybody got any questions for Joel about anything he's covered, any of the schemes? My audience today.
No, I think
was
it's covered everything really.
Thank you.
I think one thing I would say is that Kim's obviously been involved in this from sort of day one, and ultimately you've got some constants which are county council, the district council, Beat the Cold, as a charity. So all three organisations are sort of pushing together to do this and grow it together.
Joe, could I ask a question? Partly out of personal interest, but air source heat pumps. How have people got on with them? Have they? Because it is a bit of a new thing for a lot of people. A different way of heating your home.
Yeah,
have worked well.
It's probably a multifaceted question there, because there's multiple things that people need to get used to. I think it is a very, very new technology. And probably the most important thing is a heat pump in itself is probably not the answer. So if you just looked at a property and said, well, they have oil central heating, for example, and then said, oh, well, they could definitely have a heat pump. You know, technically they could, but we'd put that heat pump on, and it wouldn't be as efficient. You wouldn't get the cost savings out of it, because all the heat it produces goes out the roof, the floor, the walls. And that's really where the fabric first methodology comes in, making sure you do the walls, the ceiling and the floor first. I think we found that's very evident in the programmes that we've worked on so far, where people have sort of inquired about a heat pump, but actually then they've been kind of turned down the external wall insulation path, or sometimes just the loft insulation path, because ultimately that's what should be done first. And we know in ourselves that if we don't do that and give them a heat pump, actually what might happen is the bills might rise, because the heat pump's having to work so hard to produce enough heat for enough to stay in the property after it's all been escaped. So there's kind of multiple things that have to be done first before a heat pump is the right solution. However, given that, once that is done, they are a very, very good solution. Obviously, they're completely low carbon. It's more than just a behavioural change that residents and householders are probably going to have to become used to. It is a central heating system, but it kind of runs at a constant heat, and that's how you keep it as efficient as possible. And we've had some examples where householders have like turning it down at certain times and then blasting it at other times to get a blast of hot air whilst they watch TV in the afternoon or something. And actually in heat pump world, it's much better to have a constant level of heat rather than try and make it work really hard and then off and then work really hard and then off. So there's a behavioural element of things there, but again, it'll go back to the point of why it's so important to have people like Beat the Cold and other charities, Citizens Advice, etc., on hand to understand what's happening, because that makes it more than just here's your measure, here's how to use it, thanks, goodbye. It's more, okay, we're going to make sure that you understand how this measure works and how you can use it to generate the most benefit for you. So there's multiple different things there. I do think they're a really, really good solution, and obviously as we move into net zero, they've got to be part of any sort of strategy, especially when we're talking about housing. And ultimately, I think over time, if you've got a fully insulated home, a heat pump, solar panels on your roof, that is getting very close to decarbonisation in the housing stock, but also it's massively suppressing bills because you're taking the need to use gas away, and you're generating a lot of electricity that in turn runs your heat pump. So it's the way we need to go. We just got to be careful doing it properly, because rushing it, as most things, will probably have some unintended consequences.
I assume you become reliant on because the heat pumps require electricity to work. So if there's a power outage or something like that, as we saw in the storms, is there any backup to the system?
They have a very, very small backup. In the example of the storms, I would be very surprised if the heat pump backup could last that sort of time. If it's just a quick power output, you'd be fine. If not, then there's problems. But that's, I guess, one of the challenges if we're going to move to a fully electrified system. What do we do if the electrics goes down, as they do from time to time?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? So I'm having a personal conversation about Joel about heat pumps. And it's nothing to do with my boiler reaching 15 years and looking for alternatives. Councillor Holmes, I think you've got a question. You muted, Councillor Holmes.
That's with having big screens and little screens. Is there any advice for people like myself to get all this sorted out? Like it's okay if you're in need, but like I'm not in need yet, but I might be very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anybody I can call or say any of these and say, can you pop along and just give me some advice, please?
Yeah, so I know where you're coming from, because, we're kind of in a situation now with energy bills where actually the majority of people are starting to get concerned and starting to think of, okay, so how do I look at my own home and what improvements can I make? I think for general kind of advice, the government actually does have a very good website called simpleenergyadvice.org, I think it is. And you can do things on that website where you can kind of sort of pen in your address and you can ask you a few questions, sort of like, okay, what have you currently got in your loft? If you know, sort of, do you know if you've had any insulation in your walls? What's your current heating system? All these kind of questions about your home, and you do that sort of very quick questionnaire. It only takes a few minutes, and once you press enter, it says, well, okay, this is what we would suggest you do. This is the order we would suggest you do them in an ideal world. This is kind of the general price of that intervention. And then I think you can even click through and it will show you suppliers and stuff. And that's quite a good way, I think, of learning about your own property. I've done it for my own. I'd also suggest that you look at your EPC if you've got one, and you can search if you have one on again the government website. And if not, I'd suggest you could get that one done as well, because then someone would come round to your house and sort of assess things. They'd look at it, and then they spit out a rating, an energy cost associated with that rating, and then again the steps you can take to reduce that cost and what the measures would be. And then I think for kind of those who aren't eligible for these sort of schemes, it's kind of the same way that you'd probably look for any sort of work that you do in your property. There's various websites where installers of insulation or installers of heat pumps, etc., will sort of promote themselves with reviews and ratings, etc. And you can just ring them up, and they'll usually come and do a no obligation quote of the property. If you wanted to insulate it, they'd come and have a look and measure up and sort of tell you a guide price of how much it's going to cost. There are options out there, but I would definitely recommend going on the Simple Energy Advice website, because it's really good just for a base understanding of your own home.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I don't think we've got any more questions, but thank you very much. Very interesting. And I think you said I've shared a couple of those websites you mentioned in the chat.
Okay.
But generally, in terms of Staffordshire Warmer Homes, it's the County Council website, isn't it? I think that
yeah, that's the key routing. But I think generally as things start to grow, so at the moment, obviously phase 2's sort of well in delivery, but we are closed for applications and we're just delivering what's in the pipeline. Obviously, once the next phase starts, the need for more people to be sort of applying, getting their name in, comes back again. And I think, you know, I've had 3 years doing this sort of stuff now, and I've been out to the moorlands, I've been out everywhere in Staffordshire, I've been on the doorstep talking to people. I think the best way to get people engaged in this sort of stuff is to talk to them, and, you know, any support that you guys think you can give to schemes like this to sort of generate demand, but then also direct us in the right place, so we make sure we're targeting those that really, really need it the most. The scheme, the council can provide all sorts of sort of flyers, information sheets, etc., to arm you with the ability to do that.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Next, I think we've got, is it Lyndon from CAB? It says to be confirmed on my sheet.
Yeah, I'm here.
You'd help. Thank you. Lyndon, are you ready to present?
Yeah,
over to you.
Yeah, okay. So I sent a PowerPoint presentation. There's no pictures, unfortunately. I don't know if we can control that from here. But I can talk you through it because I've got it here, so it's no problem.
Your connection's quite poor, Lyndon. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that.
Is that any better?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's not great. I mean, the bandwidth is quite restricted, and that's why you see. So I'm just wondering if I could control the PowerPoint. Can you not hear me at all?
I think it'd be difficult to hear the presentation. You sort of come in and out.
Let me go upstairs then. Let me go upstairs and sign in on the other machine. Just give me a minute.
Okay.
Okay. I'll leave this one and I'll go upstairs.
Councillor Roberts, I've noted your declaration of interest. We lost Paul.
It's gone, I think, David.
Oh, okay. It's interesting he went. Mike, are you ready to jump in if we can't get Lyndon? Mr. Towers?
Sorry, yeah, apologies for that. I was trying to press too many buttons at once.
No problem.
Yeah, I can if you're stuck.
Should we give him? I'll give him another minute or two. Then I might call on your mic if that's okay to get us out of the hole.
No worries.
Shall we give people a couple of minutes? Does anybody need a comfort break? Might be a good opportunity if people want to get themselves a drink. We'll start again at say 25 to.
Aye, is that better?
Yeah, that's sounding better, Lyndon.
Right, I haven't got
Did
to
you say you
that.
had a presentation to share as well?
Yeah, I did have a presentation to share. It's kind of accessing it. I don't know if you can access it on your screen.
I think I can.
Yeah.
Give people until 25 to just to get a drink or a comfort break.
I'll see if I can dig it out. Just bear with me a second. It shouldn't be far away.
There you go. I think that's the presentation, hopefully.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's fine. So
just give me a minute to get back, and then we'll start again at 25 to, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. So can I control this from here?
I think you'll have to do the Chris Whitty, I'm afraid.
Right, Chris Whitty. Okay, I'll see if I can dig it out. It should be in here somewhere.
Well, if you've got it, then you could share it, yeah, and then you've got control.
Yeah, okay. Right, I'll go. Right, I'll go and drag it downstairs.
Right, shall we kick off? Do you want me to share or?
Yeah, no, I've got. Yeah, if you want to, I've got it available on my other computer anyway, so there's no worries.
So which do you prefer? Do you want me to share or are you doing it?
Go on then, if you share it, that'll make life easy for me.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, hopefully everybody's back. Oh, if you went anywhere, Lyndon, I'll pass over to you then.
All right, thank you very much.
Now.
Thank you. Right, okay. Right, thanks for taking the time to hear what we've got to say. That Leak Citizens Advice. So obviously, sort of our remit is more local, and I think some of the measures that have already been discussed are probably going to require a much more significant, even central direction, to be quite honest. So on the first slide, it just outlines who does the energy advice, how to contact us, and what kind of specialisms that we've got between us. So it's a team of two, and it's me and Matt. We've done this for, well, probably since 2013, so we've got a lot of experience. And obviously at the moment there's no merit in switching supplier because of the cap, and there's been a lot of talk about fabric first, and that's generally where our advice goes now. We look at insulation, which is one way of stopping heat leaking. Obviously any energy, any central heat system is exactly that. You're not just heating the home, you're also heating the environment, the street next door, wherever. It's not a closed system. So on the third slide, it shows, it's just a brief overview of how long we've been providing services for. So obviously predominantly vulnerable. Since 2013, we've had the opportunity to do a lot of upskilling. So I've done a lot of work through the NEA, which is National Energy Action, which is a sort of agency under the control of BEIS, as Energy and Industrial Strategy, and spent a lot of time looking at energy efficient measures, energy efficiency measures, and now looking at sort of ways of incorporating decarbonisation, because I think the crisis we face now is very much a case of after the Lord Mayor's show, really. I think this is the point where it all becomes very real, and years of talking about, I don't know what your political persuasion is in respect of climate change, but all the years of talking about options means that we've got a lot of work to do in a short space of time. So Matt's also studying the same courses as I've done. We've also qualified money advisors and also benefit specialists. There's a lot of experience that covers a sort of holistic, there's an holistic approach to energy advice. So on the next slide, we look at what we want to achieve. So I think the future of energy advice itself is in a state of flux. So in our opinion, I think decarbonisation measures are essential. It's not just something that's desirable. I think it's now an essential thing. I think the chat before alluded to the fabric first model. That is essential. That's an essential precursor to any of that kind of work, really. So as I mentioned, it doesn't matter what your political views are regarding global warming. There's no doubt that the cost of sustaining a fossil fuel-based space and water heating unit is becoming simply too expensive. So on that basis, investment in alternative renewable technologies is essential. And in our opinion, the process should look to engage those experiencing fuel poverty from the outset. Although we don't, we will give advice to anybody who seeks our services. So many of our clients are fuel poor, and and possibly, I think possibly higher than 50%, and that's certainly going to increase from tomorrow onwards. And a notable recent example of a client who's approached me was somebody who was in the armed forces and was forced to retire due to injury. Obviously spends a lot of time at home, so lives in a 3-bedroom property, and the projected energy costs for the next 12 months have risen to just shy of £6,000. She's on a fixed income of less than sort of 20,000, so it's a significant chunk of her income. So she's going to have to look at measures to resolve that, really, because I haven't got a magic bullet to help this person. So disconnections, significant likelihood for many, and obviously paying on a pay-per-view, on a prepayment basis is just going to be so difficult, so difficult. So like I said earlier, it's not going to be possible to decarbonise overnight. So I'd say how long the strategy would take. I think it has to be a general strategy that approaches everyone, really, regardless of income. And I think it's one of those strategies that's going to need some kind of central direction. So there may, some sort of opponents may point to the availability of, coal or gas or whatever, but that's ultimately going to run out. It's difficult to find. The cost of liberating the supplies will ultimately be offset on the market, and the end user will pay for that. So I think decarbonisation also has the capacity to become a humongously, important industry. It's technologically demanding. It'll require significant upskilling and potentially provide sustainable jobs. So I think in the future, this would be a key component of any credible government's industrial strategy. So in the interim, we're faced with the sticking plaster, really, and the most that we can do is try to minimise the impact of the fuel crisis by exploring options to keep warmth in, reduce consumption, and access what assistance is available. So on the next slide, so we're looking at the U value, which is the universal value used to measure, energy in the system. So it's a convention. It does have a scientific unit of, I think it's watts per meter squared per kilowatt, or kilowatts per square meter. So it effectively measures the insulation value of a system, that system being a home, such as the roof, walls and floors, because that's where most of the heat's lost. So the walls, especially the ceiling and the floors. The windows, surprisingly, don't lose so much heat through those, and doors don't lose so much heat through those, but they are very quick fixes to reduce energy loss, which is what the aim of a good energy efficient, a good insulation policy should be. So fabric heat loss is caused by heat moving through a building element or fabric. Heat is lost through the fabric of a property by conduction and is measured as thermal conductivity. The rate of thermal conductivity through a fabric of a property depends upon the difference in temperature between the inside and outside, which obviously makes this more of a problem during winter. So as the greater the temperature difference, then the faster heat will flow to the cold area. It also depends on how quickly heat can travel through the different types of fabric in the property, which explains why obviously single brick properties don't insulate as well as double bricked that have got cavity wall insulation. So I've given you the unit, and the first time that this was included in building regulations was in 1965. So obviously we know that the housing stock in Leek is quite varied, and many of the properties are sort of pre-1927 with a single brick a single brick construction. So on to the next slide. I'm trying to draw one with another. So this looks at, give me a second. Right, so then obviously one of the consequences of a poorly heated and often poorly ventilated and a poorly maintained home is condensation dampness, which is something that sort of, you know, features in the advice that we give. So many of our clients report being in damp homes, and obviously a common response from a landlord, whether that's a private landlord or a social landlord, is that it's the fault of the tenant for behaviours that are going to increase the vapour concentration in the property, and obviously that's got to escape somewhere, and often then finds its ways being deposited on walls and cold surfaces. It contributes to ill health, mental ill health, and in some cases premature death. So condensation dampness is not always the cause, and advice should be given to help eradicate the problem. I think it's an indicator that's often missed. This could be education, but often structural improvements are required as well. So we believe that improving the fabric of homes is another essential aspect that should follow the decarb, or should actually, you know, precede the decarbonisation process. So on to the next slide. I've given some general examples of types of damp that are observed in properties. So we've got issues with plumbing, rising damp, which obviously, you know, relates to a damp-proof course, and on the next slide we move on to rain penetration and faulty rainwater disposal. So obviously if there's a downspout missing, you can quickly end up with a patch of significant damp and structural damage. So on to slide 10, that's where we focus more on condensation dampness, and it tends to occur in rooms where there's lots of moisture produced, breathing, heating, drying clothes, heating, and so on. So it does not form from, you know, does not form the well-defined patches that are characteristic of other forms of dampness, and the problem will tend to be worse in cold weather. So black mould on walls and ceilings, and also green mould on or behind furniture may be found as a result of condensation dampness. So these are kind of indicators that are often missed. So measures that can be done to sort of avoid condensation. So the main factors involved in production of condensation are the amount of moisture in the air, the temperature of the air, and the presence of cold surfaces. So in order to avoid condensation, the following actions should be taken, and that's reducing the amount of moisture in the home, providing adequate ventilation for the home, increasing the heating to raise the temperature of the air and to warm the cold surfaces, and insulate the home to warm up cold surfaces and keep heat in. So on to slide 11. So in reality, I think these factors are seldom dealt with in isolation, and a more comprehensive approach is usually required to tackle a serious condensation problem. It's almost always necessary to look at both the physical structure of the building and the heating system to see how design faults may make condensation more likely, and to look at how the residents use their heating systems, ventilate their homes, and deal with moisture production. And obviously, as a wider point, insulation is key to reducing condensation dampness, because it's going to keep heat in and reduce cold surfaces. So I've given some links to some various resources. So I'll give you a link to Smarter Energy GB that look at smart meters. Give you a link to National Energy Action, which gives some good resources. The Centre for Sustainable Energy, which can look at things like decarbonisation methods, and then there's various bits and pieces on the government website which you can get through ECO, the Energy Company Obligation. And obviously there's our public site, which is reasonable, could be better, I suppose. So thanks for listening, and as a final word of advice, take your meter readings today. So that's the presentation from me. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Lyndon. I certainly like your last point about taking your meter readings today. Councillor Hoptroff.
Yeah, just to say thanks for the report, Lyndon. Obviously, I know what you and Matt have been doing over the past few years and the many clients you've helped. And many thanks for keeping it up and acquiring the skills to take it forward with the escalating crisis. Well done.
Thanks, Keith. Much appreciated.
Anything else for Lyndon? No, well, thank you very much, Lyndon. I know you come each year anyway to councillors, yeah, which is always much appreciated. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, David. Much obliged.
Thank you. Mike, over to you, hopefully.
And as if by magic.
This is how you save energy, by presenting with all your lights off, everybody.
That's right. I am totally carbon neutral at the moment. I'm even carbon coloured. So thanks for the opportunity to address yourselves today. My contribution really is somewhat tangential to the other speakers that have been on before. I'm Mike Towers, and I'm the senior officer responsible for our private sector housing enforcement advice and assistance programme at Staffordshire Moorlands. And there's just two things I really wanted to highlight today as part of the service, if you like, that we provide. One is in relation to funding, the other is in relation to enforcement. So starting with the funding element, in the Moorlands we have two capital funding streams that are available to private sector housing. One is a home repairs assistance grant, and that is where we provide a relatively low level of funding. It's £2,000 per applicant per house, and what that is for is to help those in most need, or vulnerable clients, mainly the elderly, but obviously other parties who may qualify, to improve their property. Now that might be an element of disrepair, and I think speakers before have talked about things like dampness and the impact that that can have on sort of overall energy. So the grant effectively is to help them to overcome that element of disrepair, and that disrepair might be a leaky roof, defective drainage goods, it might be their boiler, it might be double glazing, it could be anything that is causing them an issue, and it may relate to energy efficiency as much as it relates to disrepair. As I say, it's not a huge grant, but at £2,000 it's a start for people who are looking to upgrade their property or offset their energy costs by improving things like double glazing, insulation, loft insulation, that kind of thing. So that's open to application, and there is an element of means testing only in so much as the grant is relatively limited by the amount we have every year. It's £30,000 a year we have available to spend. So clearly we want to make sure that that grant reaches the most vulnerable and the most in need. And we have done work, for example, with Beat the Cold in the past, where clients have approached them for funding and have a shortfall which the energy companies or energy grants cannot fill. And we've been able to assist by providing grant approval to bridge that gap. So it is a useful tool or a useful element of funding that we can provide to help people over those significant issues in their home. The other element of funding that we provide, the main capital pot that we have available, is the Disabled Facilities Grant. Now, ordinarily, disabled facilities grants are limited to people with physical disabilities, and they are largely to adapt their home to enable them to live independently and remain safe within their house. But in the last year or so, we have introduced a suite of discretionary adaptation funding. It still will apply to people living with disability, but it extends the offer of assistance to a much wider variety of elements. So in addition to the adaptation of the property to benefit their independence, we're also offering a safe and secure grant as part of that discretionary suite. And what that is designed to do is offer a level of funding to complement the any adaptation that might be done on site, or as a standalone grant, depending on the client's circumstances. And that grant is really to help with similar elements to the Home Repairs Assistance Grant. It's to help the client maintain their property in as efficient state as they reasonably can. And we often find that when we do formal installations or mandatory installations for the DFG, that the property is in need of other elements of repair. We might find that we put a stair lift in and the property's electrics are somewhat lacking. We wanted a grant that would enable us to improve the electrics if we're putting a stair lift in, so that they can actually get the best use out of it. But the grant is also intended to rectify those everyday problems that they might be facing, like dampness, disrepair, elements that may help them to maintain the property in an efficient state as they possibly can. And that grant, I'm acting from memory, I think it's £5,000, is more than enough in most cases to get them well on the way with energy efficiency measures, particularly if it's in concert with other green funding that's available from other agencies. So we launched that last year, and it's now part of our formal private sector housing assistance policy, which was approved at scrutiny last week, and will hopefully go to executive for approval, so that we can start using that in earnest from April this year. I say April, it's not very long, it's not very far away now. So those are the forms of assistance that we currently have, and we would want to work with the partners that have presented today to identify any joined up working that we can do to make the best use of our grant for the individuals that are seeking help. The other element that I wanted to touch on is the enforcement element relating to minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector, and specifically this relates to private rented properties. It's not to say that private sector landlords are remiss when it comes to energy efficiency measures, and many landlords take pride in providing a safe and secure property for their tenants. But on occasion, it's necessary to ensure that landlords upgrade or improve their property to make sure that they are achieving a minimum energy efficiency standard. Now, the law currently states that landlords are unable to let out a property that has an energy rating on their energy performance certificate of F or G. So in properties where the landlord has made no significant energy efficiency improvements at all, or in properties where there are some but they are inadequate or insufficient, and that means that the property has a low energy efficiency rating or a low banding, then there are notices available to the local authority to require remedial action, and that landlord must make the appropriate adjustments to their energy efficiency issues to ensure that the property is brought up to a minimum of band E. Now, band E, as I'm sure the speakers before me and many of you listening will recognise, is not a particularly high standard. The highest is obviously band A. So what we offer in terms of remedial action is most of the remedial actions that achieve the most significant improvement will move that property not simply up to E, but up to D, C, or even B. So, for example, if you install double glazing and the property's already got things like loft insulation, if the energy performance certificate says, well, if you install X, Y, and Z, you can anticipate a banding of A, B, C, D, or E, then the landlord would be required to adopt those measures, to put those measures in place to ensure that it did achieve that banding. And that's the spirit, if you like, behind the minimum energy efficiency standards. So from our point of view, we're looking to roll out a programme of inspections, but following a primary contact with all those properties that we've identified that fall within that F&G banding. To give some idea, I think in the Moorlands we have something like 150, just as a round figure, maybe a little bit less than that. But there's 150 or so properties that are registered on the Landmark website as having an energy performance certificate of F or G. We will be targeting those properties up front, contacting the landlords, advising them of their legal responsibilities, and asking them for a copy of their EPC so that we can see what recommendations were made when they had that certificate done. And if those recommendations are still valid, then we will be looking for the landlord to make the appropriate improvements. It's going to be a graduated scale. We will start with persuasion and we'll end up with remedial action if we can't achieve the desired outcome. But it's hoped that the vast majority of improvements that can be made will push it up 2 or 3 bands and not just the one to get it out of the F4G banding. So that is our enforcement programme in relation to energy efficiency. As we progress further down the line of carbon reduction and energy efficiency, I am fairly confident that the government will increase their regulation, largely in terms of the private sector, but at some point they will also have to have a look at owner-occupiers and how they are reacting or dealing with energy efficiency measures. The Housing Act 2004 is a tool that applies enforcement action across the board, regardless of tenure. So it does theoretically apply to owner-occupiers as well as landlords. We've been reluctant, obviously, to enforce against owner-occupiers because largely owner-occupiers will need to address the issues themselves. We're effectively serving notice, telling them to do what they already want to do. And we have to be conscious of the cost implications. In private sector housing, it's a lot more straightforward. Landlords are expected to meet certain standards and those standards are enforceable. Just as a side note, the government have recently engaged in a consultation programme on the Decent Homes Standard, wondering really whether to make that a legal requirement. At the moment, the Decent Homes Standard is an aspirational standard and it was introduced back in sort of 2010 or thereabouts, and was backed up by a significant amount of central government funding to bring properties up to the Decent Homes Standard so that local authorities could achieve approximately less than 10% of their their properties in the borough would be poorly efficient. So the vast majority of premises in the Moorlands would achieve the Decent Homes Standard, and the Decent Homes Standard includes quite an extensive section relating to thermal comfort and efficiency, and if implemented as law, that will sit alongside the minimum energy efficiency standards to give an additional tool, if you like, to local authorities to enforce those thermal efficiency elements of the Decent Homes Standard. When we did the last stock condition survey, probably 50% of the properties with category 1 hazards had hazards relating to that thermal efficiency failure, and in terms of the decent home standards, probably 70% of the properties failed on the thermal efficiency standard. So it is a significant element of the decent home standard if it's implemented. So we took part as Staffordshire Moorlands District Council in a consultation exercise with the government department that is considering this move, and there was a general consensus across the board from the consultation that we took part in that there was a strong feeling that the decent home standard was useless as an arbitrary aspirational standard without government funding to back it up. So most of the authorities were backing a legal regime of some kind, but obviously the means of enforcement of that was the subject of some debate, and how you actually go about it, whether you are looking at a simple fixed penalty notice for failures or whether it's going to be incorporated into a more comprehensive suite of legal enforcement powers. But the jury's out on that. We'll wait to see what happens. But if the decent home standard does become law, it'll give us a much more significant input into that thermal comfort in the private sector, whether that be owner occupiers or the private rented sector. So that's basically an overview of where we are as an enforcement authority and as the private sector housing inspection authority. I hope that's been useful for you, and I'm happy to take any questions. As I said, the private sector housing enforcement scheme is not going to solve the energy efficiency situation, but it can make a useful contribution. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. If people want more information, is the first port of call our website, Mike? Is on both of those?
No, the first port of call at the moment will be me, because we're hoping to put our private sector housing renewal policy, which covers all of the things I've talked about, on our website as soon as it's signed off by the executive. So as soon as that's done, it will be available on the website. But until then, anybody that's got a query, just get in touch with myself, mike.towers@highpeak.gov.uk. That will be, I'll be more than happy to answer any individual queries or that members may have.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions for Mike today? I think you're getting off lightly, Mike. Thank you.
That's the way I like it.
Yes, not surprised. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. I do have another meeting now, David, so I'll have to leave if that's okay.
Yeah, super.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your contribution. And our headline act, I think. Phil, are you there? Phil Brennan from Upsea Energy. And here we go. Yes.
Yes, I am. Never been introduced as a headline act before, so you can judge that at the end of the act, if you like. Okay, so I haven't got any slides. I realise we're running a little bit late, so I've just got some notes I'm going to go through, and hopefully they will. That'll be enough to generate a little bit of interest. Okay, so first of all, just thanks very much for the invitation to come and talk again to this group. You've heard some quite specific talks up to now, really, about fuel poverty, warm homes, a couple of other topics. What I'm going to talk about is a lot more strategic than that, really, but more of a bigger picture item, I suppose, and more related to the council itself rather than local citizens and those people who are in need specifically. Going to look at carbon emissions and budgets, and it puts things into a bit of a wider context, I suppose, especially Scope 3 emissions, and I'll explain what they are if you're not sure. So first, just to look at carbon baselines and the council, and you'll probably have heard this term used, carbon baselines. Any organisation, any individual really needs to understand what its own carbon baseline or carbon footprint is. If you're gonna make any kind of progress, or you've got any kind of interest in this issue, then you need to know where you stand and what your impact is at the moment. Now, if you're gonna do that from the council's own perspective, from its own operational perspective, you need data about your assets, and that will be data about your buildings and your vehicles. And you know the kind of issues that come up around these kind of issues. So for your buildings, how is your energy recorded? Have you got half-hourly detailed data? Is it estimated data? Do people understand the bills? Are they checked when they come into the council, or are they simply paid as a matter of process? Are you getting charged for your own meters? Are they connected correctly, and are you paying the right tariff? We've certainly dealt with councils who've been paying for meters for buildings that have been demolished a good kind of 5 or 6 years. They are you can claim back overpayment for 7 years previous. So we've helped councils claim back funding that they've been paying too much for. So all those general kind of bill management issues. And the type of thing that you should be keeping on top of, but not, sometimes that kind of thing slips, and you can understand it. But still, if you're looking at energy and you're looking at your carbon baseline, those are the type of things you should be aware of. And it's the same with vehicles. First of all, you've got to have a list of your assets. In this case, a list of the vehicles that you're using, and you'd be surprised that the councils who haven't got a full list of those. What type of vehicle is it? What size of engine it is? The amount of fuel that's used and the type of fuel that's used, and the mileage. Of course, you need that kind of detail in order to establish your carbon baseline, and you'll understand why. Your waste collection vehicle isn't moving when the crusher's on, but it is using fuel. So it's not necessarily about the mileage; it's about the fuel that's used as well. And then you've got to look at what emissions are the responsibility of the council, who owns and operates certain assets, and there's an issue around different scopes. Now, you might have heard these terms about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. They are just ways of categorising emissions and who is responsible for them, really. So your own buildings will be categorised under scope 1 and 2 within these reports, and they are those where the energy is purchased and acquired and consumed by the council. And the same with vehicles. Vehicles that come under scope 1, vehicles that the council owns or they might lease, and they operate purely for the council's own operations. That's scope 1 and scope 2. Scope 3 a little bit more difficult because they are under the influence of the council, but not its direct control. And it can be difficult to obtain this kind of data in order to calculate, your emissions on the back of that, really. Obviously, one of the larger contributors to carbon emissions is those goods and services that the council will purchase. So, typical amongst that might be capital goods, office supplies, furniture, telephones, computers, IT equipment, or services like landscaping services, maintenance and repair, consultancy services, all those type of things. Equally, emissions under scope 3 for a council would include waste, water supply and wastewater, leased buildings. For example, you might lease one of your leisure services to a leisure service provider. The council owns the building, but the leisure service provider pays for the bill. So that's a scope 3 emission. Now, as I say, difficult to get hold of that kind of information. Large suppliers, I don't know, somebody like Brakes, who supply, an awful lot of councils with catering, with food, should have the capacity to provide emissions data. If you've got a couple of guys who are cleaning the town hall windows, they won't have the capacity to do it. But still, these things are generated because the council is producing a demand for them. As I say, it's difficult to get that kind of information, and really you've got to take a decision about how useful the data is in terms of your overall footprint. So we've worked with councils who just recently they were looking at the grey fleet, where officers use their own vehicles for work purposes, it's an emission that the council's responsible for. But they didn't have this data. They should have had it really, but they didn't have it. But it accounts for such a small proportion of the carbon footprint that it's not really worth spending the time looking for it. What they need to do is put a system in place so the next time they identify the carbon baseline, they the data's there and they can collect it and feed it into the process. And of course, identifying a baseline is one thing, trying to reduce it is something else entirely. And that's all about behaviour change. And I'll just mention something that I was listening to yesterday, which was a webinar, and there was a guy on there from a law firm. This law firm had maybe 12 or 15 offices in the UK. So they're big, relatively big organisation, but not massive by any means. And they are trying to become carbon neutral. And one issue they were looking at was air travel within the UK for the staff, and staff flying to meetings, obviously because flying is one of the biggest sources of emissions, and specifically was for them. So what they said to the staff was, if you want to continue to fly, then you can do, they're not ruling out flying. But for each flight, £200 was going to be added to the cost internally, to their internal budget. They weren't asking these particular individuals to pay £200. And they didn't say whether the extra £200 was going to go to, maybe to a fund to offset other emissions internally or something. I didn't go into that. But that was the particular issue that they were highlighting, that they put £200 onto the cost of the flight. Now, they were talking specifically about some people who regularly did a trip from Southampton to Manchester, from the Southampton office to the Manchester office and back. Now, there is a direct train that goes from Southampton to Manchester, although it's quicker and cheaper to fly, a lot cheaper to fly actually. But the point is, this £200 makes them think twice. Presumably somebody's got to sign off the £200, and it makes them think about it too. So that's a bit of a stick for them. It's £200 here. That's something to make people consider whether flying is an option. Also, what they put in place is for anybody who is travelling on the train instead of flying for more than 2 hours, they're going to put them in first class. So that's an encouragement. That's the old carrot and stick approach, of course. And at the same time, they were cutting their overall travel budget by 50%. So when that runs out at some point in the year, somebody then has got to go and get someone to sign off an extra travel funding from a budget that at that point won't exist. So, again, you're justifying your decision and making people think about it. And there's a bit of encouragement there too for an alternative. Now, we know that local authorities don't send many people on flights these days, but you understand the principle. There's a message there to use public transport first. The not necessarily the cheapest form of public transport, but the most appropriate. And they're trying to make travel on the train, in this case, the better and easier, encourage that than travel on a plane for longer journeys. In this case, they're deliberately asking people to take the more financially expensive option. They're deliberately going for the expensive option. Now, local authorities don't normally think of things that way for obvious reasons. They haven't got the funding, they're normally strapped for cash. But it doesn't mean that they can't do it. So you are able to make these type of choices if you wish, and you'll know more than I do that there's far more pressure on councils to do it. And if you're serious about behaviour change, it's the kinds of action they should be taking. So just moving back to baselines, once you've got a definitive baseline, you can work out the next step, which is to be carbon neutral. Lots of councils have set a target which is nearer than the national target of 2050. Some of them are a bit more ambitious rather than realistic, but still that's the situation we're in. And there's a lot of focus on those dates. So if a council has said we're going to be carbon neutral for our internal operations by 2035, it's normally the 2035 that takes the focus. And really, the focus is on the date rather than the amount of carbon being emitted. So as a country, we've got a carbon budget that we can emit between now and, in our case, 2050, if we want to stay within, the 1.5 degree increase. And that amount has been split into local authority areas, providing a carbon budget for each local authority. Now, this is, vital, because if the organisation simply says we'll meet our target date of 2030, and one way of doing that is to change most of our vehicles to electric vehicles in 2029, they may well meet the date deadline, but they will have used far more of the carbon budget than they should do until the end of that time period. So it's the carbon budget that organisations need to focus on, and not the date. Now, when a lot of these climate emergencies were identified, nobody said we're going to work within our carbon budget. What they said was we're going to be carbon neutral by a certain date. So there's a bit of a, the emphasis was on the wrong thing there, really. But again, something else to think about there, really. Just wanted to go through those couple of issues, mainly because a lot of people don't necessarily understand the complexities of the data, and this issue around declarations being focused on a date rather than on the amount of carbon being emitted. Okay, that's me done. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Phil. I think that's like the last point about. Sorry, I'm just going to go on mute a minute. And focusing on a carbon budget rather than date, I think is a very interesting one, because I think most of us seem to fall in the trap of focusing on 2030, 2035, 2050, or whatever's chosen. I thought that was a very good point. Thank you for that. Any other questions for Phil?
Can I ask a quick one, David?
Of course you can.
Are we
You're on mute.
Again?
No, Phil, when he responds, I'll put him on mute for the feedback.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Can I ask, are we actually looking a lot at this, and have we ignored it because of the date? We're all working towards the date, but as Phil said, are we doing other things in between?
I think it's really easy to get to focus on the date because it's an easy thing to focus on.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of councils declared a climate emergency and set themselves a carbon neutrality date without doing the work based on relevant data to say, if we spend a reasonable amount of money and put a reasonable amount of effort into it, when could we be carbon neutral? And then coming out with a date which might be 2030, July 2032. They didn't do that. What they said was, we'll be carbon neutral by 2030. And now go away and let's figure out how we get there. And really, the approach should have been the other way around. Obviously, it should have been the other way around.
Well, we had a presentation on one of Joe's meetings, and the consultants actually showed us that we would miss by a great big margin. So we need to sort of start now to move on to some of the things you've already said we need to start chopping. Now, Keith Hoptruff will tell you that we've got one of the biggest carbon emitting companies in the country, which is Lafarge. Are we in the Moorlands ever going to meet those targets with Lafarge there? I know they said they'll spread it out, but we can't just say like, well, it's all going up that chimney, mate. You can't just take a bit off the top and send it up to Manchester.
Well, there's a couple of things there, isn't there? There's that distinction between what the council can do and those things that are within the influence of the council's own operations, and being carbon neutral for your own operations within a certain date, which is probably doable if you put a reasonable amount of effort and finance towards it. And those other things which are within the council's area. And that's the scope 3 stuff. That's just the things that are within the area, but are not under the direct control of the council.
Yeah, I think we're doing well on the council side.
Right. Yeah. Good.
The scope 3 bit is worrying me slightly, because we're not seeing anything happening outside of the council. I know the council can achieve it. I know that without fear of a doubt.
Okay.
But I can't see us getting Staffordshire Moorlands carbon zero.
Have you set a date for that?
Was it 25, David, or was it
2030?
2030.
2030 for the wider authority.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is very ambitious. You don't need me to tell you that. That is very ambitious.
Yes, we know, but we're an ambitious council. We like to do things,
That's fine. But getting a big organisation like Lafarge, any kind of construction organisation, cement makers, anything like that, is a big job to get them to be carbon neutral. What they often their approach is, okay, we're not carbon neutral here, but we're offsetting it somewhere else, which is really offsetting is your last option. You do everything else before offsetting, really, because you're just kicking the can down the road, giving the problems to somebody else, and you're not actually solving the problem on site.
If by satellite we could see it, we couldn't offset it, could we? So it's there.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a role there for the council, in terms of how it tries to be a leader in the area, but for the council to turn around and saying we are gonna in some way have got the powers to make a big local organisation carbon neutral is, well, we haven't got the powers. That's all there is to it. It's just about influencing and trying to get them to toe the line, really, and that is probably something that goes on, at national government level for those big organisations, those multinationals.
Thanks for coming on, Lafarge. Just we do liaise with them, and
yes, I know.
And I think to be fair to Lafarge, that they produce a product that is needed around the country, and they are doing taking steps to improve their situation. It's just the actual process that of producing cement and their industry is something that produces carbon emissions. So it's not for want of trying. It's the technology and the chemistry about the production.
Yeah, we know that he's got it all in hand.
Councillor Hopcroft, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I say I worked there for 44 years, so I know the issues, what they've had, and what they have been doing over the years to improve it.
I mean, that's the issue there, isn't it? Really, that they bring jobs, they bring income to the area, and nobody wants to lose the jobs or the kind of income that's generated. But equally, they are producing a lot of emissions, and you've got to balance the two.
All of the waste fuels, what they burn as well, the tyres, tyre chips, the sewage pellets, the plastics.
Yeah.
They don't use a lot of coal. They don't use a lot of diesel on the firing, only when they're warming the kiln up. A lot of it's waste fuels what they're using. It's good in that way.
Yeah, I suppose the bottom line is, if you can get your own house in order, you're then in a good position to turn around and say, well, look, we've made a significant change here in our organisation. That's an example for others.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Phil. If no more questions, I'd like to bring it to a close. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for the speakers for giving up their time, and thank you particularly to Kim for organising this and putting it on for us. Hopefully you've got a lot out of today. We will look to upload the recording on our website afterwards, and we'll make what information we can available to you. Would be helpful if you can, Amy, particularly at the councillors, if you could pass it on to other members of your groups and get that information as widely spread as possible. Yeah. Matthew Cole, Fuelbelt Foundation, is obviously offered to give us the summary of his report. I think that was a very good opening presentation, particularly around the prepayment meters, which was something that I'd not particularly, I don't think we'd emphasised before. We're lucky then that we've got Beat the Cold and Joel from E.ON, who are providing those services, both practical and advice in the area. They've been great partners to us over the years, and we certainly want to continue with that relationship. Sit and Advise, well known to us, come visit the council every year, don't they, and provide an update, and again, very valuable services. Mike gave us a presentation on the work we can do about the private rented sector, which is a sector that sometimes gets slightly missed out in, that a lot of the attention is on homeowners, and the ability to influence landlords is sometimes limited. And I think Mike said that the report on private sector housing will be going through the committee cycle, or has been through the committee cycle, is just waiting to be signed off. So that will be available on our website. And then finally, Phil, thank you very much. I think the bit from Phil's presentation that I'll take away in particular was around that focus on budgets and emissions rather than on a particular year. As you say, you could achieve it, say 363/4 of the final year, but it's not really achieving what we want to achieve. So thank you all on that note. Take care, and to steal Lyndon from the CAB's point, go and take your measurements of your meters before it goes up overnight. Thank you all, and take care.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you. See you all. Bye.